Hello and welcome back to AP Psychology. I'm Miss Lee and we are still in Unit 5, which is Cognitive Psychology. In this video, we're going to be discussing storage as it relates to memory. Our learning target is to outline the principles that underlie effective storage of memories. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and grab your notes and let's get started. Okay, so when we're talking about storage, it's important that we know both how we store information and where we store it. When you consider memory overall, you have to understand that storage is basically the heart of it. How things are stored and how easily we can retrieve the information from our storage is critical to the overall memory process. There are three ways that we store memory, and they're shown on your screen right now. So basically, it starts out with sensory memory. These are going to be shorter term memories that we may or may not even process. So you have an event and it is stored in your sensory memory. It is then encoded into your working or short term memory. It is at that point either retrieved, where it is used and discarded afterwards if it's not something that we need later on, or it is further encoded into our long-term memory so that we can retrieve it into our working memory and use it. We use information out of our working memory. And the goal really is to keep important information that we're going to need to retrieve over and over again in our long-term memory. Our long-term memory is basically unlimited. We have not found a limitation on it yet, but what does limit our ability to retain information in long-term memory is basically how we encode the information, how we store the information, and how we try to retrieve the information. The estimates that scientists have been able to kind of put together say that the capacity ranges from 1,000 billion to 1 million billion bits of information are able to be stored in our long-term memory. So I want to tell you about a young man named Rajan Mahadevan. He was able to recite the first 31,811 digits of pi. This is the ratio between the diameter and circumference of a circle. It's unlimited, and it begins at 3.14, which is usually what we kind of stop at if you're me, and it continues on indefinitely. It just goes on and on and on and on. He had an amazing ability to remember things. Here is a picture of him today, which I think is really interesting. He is a professor at UT Knoxville, so I think that's kind of interesting, somewhat just down the road from us. Collectively, a lot has been done to look for the physical existence of a memory, so some type of a physiological trace. And what has been found out in all of this research is that we're looking for an engram. This is physical memory, and it is the basis of our long-term memory, and it's taken two approaches. First, we look at the level of the synapse. So we're talking about very small neurotransmitter-sized traces of information, and they are believed to represent the physical memory trace in nerve cells. We also look at neural circuitry, and this is used by memory in the brain. So it's how the brain is sending the message. So when we're talking about synaptic changes, this is long-term memory forming at the synapse. It's a very fragile chemical trace that gradually consolidates into more permanent synaptic changes over time. Basically, what this theory is that we leave chemical breadcrumbs in the synapse. The more we use, the stronger the memory trail. And this shouldn't be any big surprise to you because we've already talked about synaptic pruning and that whole process. So this explains why a blow to the head or an electric shock to the brain could potentially cause loss of recent memories that have not been consolidated yet. And this leads us to this concept of long-term potentiation. This is a persistent strengthening of synapses based on recent patterns of activity. So you're looking at patterns of synaptic activity that produce long-term, long-lasting increases in signal transmission between two neurons. And basically, we've talked about this before. The more you use a memory, the stronger it will be due to long-term potentiation. So any process is stronger the more you do it, the more you use it, and memory is no different. And basically, here's what this looks like. In both the central and the peripheral nervous systems, acetylcholine serves as the main signal molecule in the synaptic cleft. So what you're looking at here is both an increase in neurotransmitter being released, again, that's acetylcholine, as well as a larger concentration of receptors. So it's kind of a double whammy. If you have good memory, it's because of these two specific processes located at the synaptic level. In neural circuitry, the research that we've done, it started looking at individuals who had parts of the brain removed due to some type of operation that did not go the way it was supposed to go. One of the most famous examples of this is HM. This is what he is known as in our community, although more information of the individual has come to light. HM had surgery for epileptic seizures, and during this surgery, his hippocampus and amygdala on both sides of his brain were removed. The surgery was conducted in 1953, and since that time, he's been unable to create any new memories of the events of his life. However, his memory of events before the surgery remains unchanged. So his long-term memory is still fine, but his ability to form new memories has been basically erased. And yes, he's still alive, last time I checked. So you look at parts of the brain involved in memory. We'll start kind of over at the left. The prefrontal cortex, this is memory involving the sequence of events, but not the events themselves. So this gives you that sense of kind of when things happened in the timeline of your life. The amygdala encodes emotional aspects of memories, and that shouldn't come as any surprise to you. The medial temporal lobe, even though it's not really shown here on the screen, it encodes and transfers new explicit memories to long-term memory. And we're going to get into what an explicit memory is in just a moment. And then you have the hippocampus and the cerebellum. The hippocampus encodes and transfers new explicit memories into long-term memory, and the cerebellum is going to have memories involving movement. So again, the hippocampus aids in the initial encoding of information, so it's the starting point. The cerebral cortex is where memories are changed into more or less permanent memories, and the amygdala strengthens memories that have strong emotional associations. Basically, these emotional connections could also potentially act as an aid to access and retrieve those memories, and it's probably what's responsible for the persistent and troubling memories associated with post-traumatic stress disorder. So where are memories stored? Well, basically, memories don't just get stored in one place, they reside all over the brain. And it depends on the nature of the material being learned. Information storage appears to be linked to the sites where the processing of that information occurs. So if the information is visual, then the memory would be stored in the visual cortex. So there's an interesting dichotomy in memory. Heightened emotions, whether it's stress-related or otherwise, make for stronger memories. The stress seems to boost activity in the brain's memory-forming areas. However, if stress is continued, if it's lengthy, if it's heightened, it can actually disrupt memory. So let's talk about implicit memory. These are memories that you're not consciously aware of, yet they can seriously affect your behavior. Let's say you were bitten by a dog when you were very, very young, let's say 2 years old. Well, your hippocampus is not formed well enough yet at that point to be able to process that memory in a way that can be stored in your long-term memory. However, that person could experience a long-term fear of dogs because of what happened. So even though the memory is not an explicit memory, it's not something that you can draw back up, it is such an emotional event that the memory is going to be stored as an implicit memory. It's something that can't be directly or consciously brought back into your awareness. Most implicit memories are procedural memories. For example, brushing your teeth. You probably don't remember actually learning how to brush your teeth, but let's hope that that event of learning how to brush your teeth impacted your behavior this morning. Procedural memory is usually memory for skills and habits. Most procedural memories are implicit, as you don't have to think about them. So like after you learn how to walk, you don't really have to remember the steps. You don't have to remember the how-to because you've already learned that information and it's been transferred into your implicit memory. So walking, riding a bike, driving, that type of thing. An explicit memory is an intentional or conscious recollection of information. You're deliberately trying to remember something, you have to put some actual effort into remembering the information. Examples of explicit memories would be taking a test. You have to remember the information you've learned and studied when it's time to take the test. And an eyewitness account is another example. Whatever happened in the incident, what people were wearing, what did they look like, that's not something that you just implicitly know. It's something that you have to consciously remember so that you are able to give that account. Declarative memory is memory for factual information like names, faces, dates, and usually they are explicit memories and require some type of conscious mental effort. So that would be something like recalling directions for driving, and this is if you don't have a GPS, and it's that cool scene in the movie that you're now telling your friends about, that really awesome song that you remember hearing, that cool little bit of research information that you found out in psychology class. Those are all declarative memories. And there are two types of declarative memories. There's semantic, which is memory for language, facts. It's kind of your general knowledge, and it's the stuff that you know. It's a lot of what you learned in school. It's factual. Episodic memory is memories for biographical details of our individual lives. So it's kind of the telling the story type of memories. Episodic memories store temporal coding. They're kind of like time tags to both identify when the memory occurred as well as where. Kind of contextual information there. And that is it for memory storage. In our next video, we'll talk about retrieval of memory. I can't wait to see you then. Bye for now.